A thorough understanding of the exposure triangle is essential for mastering photography. Proper exposure is the amount of light required to fully illuminate the image data, and it is controlled by three camera settings: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. In this video, we are going to focus entirely on aperture, since it is the most challenging for new and even experienced photographers. By the end of this relatively short video, you will no longer feel a need to memorize camera settings because you will have a clear understanding of how your camera captures and records light. It might surprise you to know that you don't need to have a lens to create a camera. You only need a hole or aperture, the photographic word for hole or opening. As far back as 500 BC, people in China were commenting on the fact that light passing through a small hole in a piece of fabric or a wicker basket sometimes produced an inverted image on another surface. Discussion of this phenomenon continued throughout history and led to the first pinhole camera in 1850, created by Scottish scientist Sir David Brewster. If you understand what happens when light passes through a hole, you will be in a better position to master the more subtle, creative aspects of photography. When light passes through a small hole, it produces an inverted image on a surface at some distance from the hole. The image is inverted because light travels in straight lines. Imagine sunlight hitting a point on a leaf at the top of a tree. The surface of the leaf will absorb some of the light and reflect the rest away from it. Some of that reflected light then passes through the pinhole in a straight line from that specific point on the leaf and strikes the surface at the back of the camera box. Because the light is traveling in a straight line, points on the top of the tree will project to the bottom of the box, and points at the bottom will project to the top. This results in an inverted image on the back of the box, which can be captured if you place a digital sensor or film back there. If the hole is a pinhole, all the light rays will pass through the hole like a tightly wrapped bundle and create a very sharp image. But what happens when the hole gets larger? When a ray of light enters the camera box, some of its energy is absorbed by the surface it strikes. The light energy that is not absorbed by the sensor or film is free to bounce around the box like a ball. This additional light causes some blurring of the otherwise crisp image. Rays of light that pass through the aperture perpendicular to the sensor create a sharp image, while rays of light that enter at an angle bounce around the enclosure and cause a blurry effect around the limits of the image. To adjust this opening, modern cameras use a mechanism inside the lens. The size of the camera aperture is controlled by a diaphragm, which is a series of movable plates or blades that move in unison to open and close much like the iris of our eyes. To put it simply, the diaphragm is the donut and the aperture is the donut hole. Modern camera lenses are compound lenses that contain a number of simple lenses before and after this diaphragm to fix optical defects. The size of the aperture for any lens is measured as an f-stop. This is simply the focal length f divided by the diameter of the opening. For example, a 50 millimeter focal length with a 12.5 millimeter diameter opening is 50 divided by 12.5, or f over 4. Most people are confused by the fact that large f-stop numbers indicate small holes and vice versa. This is because an f-stop number is actually a fraction. Just as 1/4 is larger than 1/32. An aperture of f4 is much larger than an aperture of f32. A full stop change on a camera lens alters the area of the aperture opening by a factor of 2. It either cuts the area in half or doubles it. In this way, an f-stop determines the exact amount of light entering the camera at any given moment. This fundamental relationship is what controls the depth of field, which indicates how much of your image is sharp and how much is blurred. Small holes with large f-stop numbers like f16 or f22 create a large depth of field, keeping the image in focus from the foreground to the background. Large apertures with small stop numbers like f1.4 or f2.8 have a shallow depth of field, resulting in a sharp subject, surrounded by a blurry background. Bokeh is the word used to describe the quality of that blurring. Basically, it's the aesthetic quality of the blurred background. If a lens has a good bokeh, the background blur is very even in color distribution. Poor bokeh looks splotchy. Bokeh is affected by the focal length of the lens as well as the aperture size. As a reminder, the focal length is the distance from the lens's optical center to the plane where the light rays form a sharp image on the sensor or film. Short focal lengths like 12 millimeters or 14 millimeters are wide-angle lenses that have a very wide view angle and exaggerate the size of close objects. Long focal lengths like 200 millimeters or 400 millimeters are telephoto lenses that have a narrow view angle, act like magnifying glasses, and compress distance, making faraway objects look much closer than they are. So far, we have talked about small and large apertures, but what about everything in between? That's where experience comes into play. Although f32 should theoretically give the greatest depth of field, optical physics throws a wrench in things. Diffraction effects can cause some deterioration of the image at very small openings, meaning the sharpest images for most lenses actually land between f8 and f11. The only way to know your lens sweet spot for sure is to shoot a series of test shots at various f-stops and compare the results. If you are just getting started, I highly recommend shooting everything with a fixed focal length 50 millimeter lens, often called a prime lens for a while. Fixed lenses are sharper and less expensive than zoom lenses. I forced myself to shoot exclusively with a 50 millimeter lens for 2 whole months, even though I owned other lenses. The learning curve was incredible. Instead of zooming, you have to physically move your body backward or forward to frame your shot. If I needed a wide-angle view, I took a series of shots and stitched them together in Photoshop, which forced me to master both my camera's capabilities and my editing software. To wrap things up, here are a few simple rules of thumb to take into the field. For landscapes, you want a large depth of field to keep everything sharp from front to back, so choose a small aperture with a large f-stop number like f16 or f22. For portraits and flowers, you want a sharp subject with a beautifully blurred background. So choose a large aperture with a small f-stop number like f1.4 or f2.8. For candid social gatherings, you usually want to capture faces clearly alongside the environment, so opt for a medium aperture in the f8 to f11 range, where image quality is highest and depth of field isn't too extreme. Each photography genre has its own optimum settings, largely dependent on the depth of field you desire for artistic purposes. Photography is as much about inspiration as it is about technique. If you're ready to take control of your camera, my books are like a roadmap that will help you master photography by the shortest route possible. When I first got serious about digital photography, I was incredibly frustrated by the fact that every book I bought used language I didn't understand and assumed I already had experience using programs like Photoshop. That frustration inspired me to write books specifically for beginners that eliminated those problems entirely. To my surprise, it was actually experienced photographers who gave me some of my best reviews. Head over to al-photography.com/mybooks to explore my complete collection of step-by-step guides and find a perfect map for your journey. While you're there, be sure to look through the fine art galleries to see how these exact exposure rules look when captured in full, high-resolution detail. Check out the link in the description below, and happy shooting. Let's keep it simple.